Okay, well, while I'm getting this going, I don't know if it's been officially announced, but Jenny Crumpler is finished raising support. That's right. For those of you that don't know, the way that all of us as staff are paid is that we go out and we talk to other people and we say, here's what we're trying to do at Virginia Tech. What do you think about coming on board with that? And we do that until we've raised a sufficient amount to handle insurance and salary and Social Security and all of that. And she just finished. And I found out from hanging out with Margaret this past weekend that she and Steph are both over halfway done. So that's very cool. All right. Well, let's pray. God, we just we come before you tonight as we're closing up this series on money, on stewardship, on handling, looking at the things that we have in a way that honors you more. God, I pray that you would just guide us, you'd speak to us. Please. Amen. All right. Well, so this is week 3 of this little mini series that we have on money, and really more on how do we look at how God is and what He's doing in our lives. And David McCann did the first 2 weeks, did a great job, and so I'm closing it up. But I want to show you a picture of something that's also very exciting, and you guys might have seen this on Insta. So maybe I'd like to show you something. There it is. That is the Storehouse Plant Team. We took a trip up to Penn State the end of last week and into this weekend so they could find places to live. Because if you're going to stay somewhere a while, it's nice to have a place to sleep. And so they found apartments, which is very cool. The places that they found were great. And as we were going up, and it was really exciting, even though Margaret is still working to raise her support, it was really great as part of the plant team for her to be able to join us. So that was a really nice thing. But as we were heading up there were the 5 of them and me. So none of us had any cars that could fit 6 people. So we rented a sweet Dodge minivan from Enterprise. All right, and when you rent a vehicle, as I'm sure a number of us have at least, there are a number of things that happen. You enter into a contract with Enterprise to take their vehicle. And it kind of works on both sides. It stipulates when you're going to pick it up, when you're going to return it, so that you know a vehicle's ready and they know when it's back. It stipulates that you will return it with as much gas in it as the same level of gas that you took it. Who can drive it, who can't, how many miles you can go, what happens if you dent it. All of this stuff is done. And that contract provides some clarity and some predictability, right? Everybody understands where everybody is. So it protects the Solorzanos who actually rented it from Enterprise saying, you know what, we just decided we want to charge you 4 times as much because we want to, and we can. It says you can't do that. We've already kind of clarified how much it's going to cost. It protects Enterprise from the Solorzanos saying this is a sweet Dodge minivan, and we don't ever want to return it because it's so sweet, which would not have been our response. But, it protects Enterprise. And so this is kind of the contractual way that we navigate a lot of the situations that we're in. And it's a really good thing when you need a contract. And when we're talking about giving and we're talking about money, when we're talking about a lot of things with God, there's a lot of times where it can be a little tricky because we apply contractual thinking into things with God, right? So when we're thinking about giving and we think, how much of my money am I going to give, and why should I give my money? What am I doing with it? There's some problems with the my part in it. So there's that, but it's kind of, we wouldn't ever voice this, and we don't even really think this, but it's at least in this vein, if I am giving, what am I going to get in return? If I give this, am I going to get a 12% return? God's going to give me somehow for Christmas, I'm going to get extra money, and so I'll actually get it back, plus 2% if I do the tithe. If I give, am I going to get a better deal on a car than I might have otherwise? Or am I going to get the house? Or is God going to let me get into this major, get this job? We kind of approach it with, I'm going to provide this. God, what are you going to give me back? And that's understandable because so much of our life is built on contract, on agreement. You do this, I do this. As long as everybody does their part, everything's fine. The tricky thing is, with God, he's taking us to something else with our money, and not just with our money. I mean, sometimes, and David made, this point really well over the last couple of weeks, that we can kind of get a little squeamish when we're thinking about our money because it feels personal, right? As we were planning this series, there was some nervousness, not a lot, but there's some nervousness, like because every week we have new people that start coming and like, oh my gosh, what if people start coming at week 1 of the series and it's like, gosh, every week at NLCF they're talking about money. You just that's kind of stuff that makes you nervous when you're, talking from this and thinking about things like that. And the reason that money makes us so squeamish is because we've just been taught it's personal and private. But it also, it means a lot more. It's not just a technical exchange medium, right? I need to have it, because there's certain things I just need to get. Money is a lot more than that. Money for us is security, right? The more money we have, the more secure we are. That's a way that a lot of us can think. Money is status. It lets you buy certain things that demonstrate something to the people that you're around. Money is entertainment. It lets us do fun things. Sometimes that costs money. It's any number of things that are like that. It's convenience. All of this. And it's fair. But what that can do is that can start to shape us. And culture can actually disciple us in a way of looking at whether it's money or the way that we operate in relationships, the way we look at our future, the way that we navigate life with God. It starts to kind of shape us into, if I provide this for you, God, what am I going to get back? And God isn't just saying, well, I can't handle that. That's too hard for me. He's saying, no, that very thing that you're thinking is actually broken. And I want to take you back to something that's much, much earlier than that. I want to take you to something much deeper. I want to rid you of some of those things that money provides you so that you can receive those things from me. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay? In Hebrews 13, we kind of see how all this works. And it's kind of sketched out there, and so it's a little messy, but that's kind of the way these couple of sentences go. See, it starts off really straightforward, in a really straightforward way. Don't love money. Be satisfied with what you have. Now, this is really common phrasing for Hebrews. There are a lot of places in Hebrews where it says, don't do this instead. Okay, that's not all that it is. Proverbs has a lot of that. The foolish person is like this. The wise person is like this. Don't do this, do this. It's not just that, right? But it has a lot of that in it. And so it says, don't love money, be satisfied with what you have. But then it starts kind of taking it in a way that maybe isn't as straightforward as we would think. It says, for God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. Other translations say, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. Okay? So what it's saying, it starts off with, don't love money, be satisfied with what you have. And then it says, here's the reason that you shouldn't. Because of that, since God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. Now, that's not really, for most of us, why we love money. Right? Most of us love money because of those other things that it gives. And so we would think if God was operating contractually, he would say, don't love it, be satisfied with what you have because I'm going to provide in this predictable manner this amount of protection, this amount of provision. I'm going to lay all this out for you in a way that you can not just experience, but you can expect in a really practical way. But what this section in Hebrews is doing is it's starting to take us on this curve. And it does a couple of those as it goes through. So don't love money. Be satisfied with what you have because God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. The reason you can be satisfied is because God is with you. Not because he says in every situation you're going to have plenty of money. So just don't love it because I'm with you. And I will never abandon you. I will never leave you. There were early in Tracy's and my marriage, and I've shared this before. I mean, we were poor. That first year that I was on staff, I can't remember if we made, it was just under $10,000 or just under $12,000 a year. Now, that was a long time ago, but it also wasn't the 20s. You know, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. And I remember we had at Walmart, you could get 3 jars of spaghetti sauce for $5. And we ate that almost all the time because that is quite honestly what we could afford. When Trace was pregnant with Noah, our oldest, she had 2 maternity outfits, one of which had been given to her. That was it. That was all we could afford. There's one point where I don't remember if it was her sunglasses or mine, but they're like a $5 pair of sunglasses. And we were talking about how long is it going to take us to be able to replace these things? That's where we were. And so I can tell you, having been in that, and I'm not laying that out as, look, see, I've had the worst experience. I probably haven't. Okay? But having gone through a season like that lasted for a few years, and in the midst of it, we didn't know if it was going to be permanent, if it was going to end. It did end, which I'm grateful for in some ways. But, you know, it kind of kept, I caught sight of my Apple Watch as I was talking about it. That's probably indicative that it ended because I'm wearing an Apple. Anyway, that's not important. But, you know, it's like this kind of idea that we have that I remember that feeling of I need some of those things that money provides. And I would love to be able to stand up here and say, and so what I did is I just trusted the Lord consistently every day. Now, and we did. But there was, again, a lot of these things I've shared with you before. But I used to have to go back behind our house when we were living in Christiansburg at the time. And there was this hill behind our house with a stand of trees on it. And I would go up to the top of this hill, and I'd found this stick in the woods. And I would have to go into there, and no one was around, you know, you could see. And I would yell at God and pound the ground with the stick until I was tired. And then I would walk back down, typically apologize for what I had just said to God, and then move on with things. So I know what it's like to feel frustration that you don't know what to do with, and you don't know when it's going to end, and you have no promise that it will. But as I look back on that time, there are things that God taught me in the midst of that God taught Trace and I in the midst of that. I don't know that we would have learned. Probably other people can learn it without it. I think we needed that time. And in the midst of it, even though day to day it was difficult, I look back on it and you can see all of these places where God did not ever abandon us. We didn't have as much money as we wanted. We didn't have the opportunity to love it, except from a distance, I guess. But be satisfied with what you have. For God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. And then it goes on to say, so because of that, so see, it says, don't love it, be satisfied with what you have because I'm with you. And then it turns it again. Because of that, we can say with confidence. And I want us to look at that word can. We have the opportunity to say with confidence. We may not let ourselves get to the point where we will allow ourselves to say it with confidence. We may just stay angry at God enough that we just grit our way through it and then either quit him or things get better, whatever it is. But we have the opportunity to say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, so I will have no fear. So this thing started with saying, don't love money. Be satisfied. God won't leave you. Now it's saying, because God is my helper, I don't have to be afraid. So much of the reason we love money so much of the time is because we're afraid if we don't have it. Sometimes we get frustrated because we feel like God is not honoring his contractual obligation to take care of us in a manner in which we feel like is valid. I think there's a lot of times when we're going through that what he's really trying to do is rid us of fear. And if you're like me, not everybody is, but if you're like me, I kind of have to experience it to get it. I have to be in that situation that's frightening and watch God get me through it. What can mere people do to me? And then it closes it out with that. What can people do? You see, so often when we think about how we're spending money, when we're thinking about are we going to give it, what it comes down to is how much does that restrict what I can have? According to this, it would say none. Absolutely none. Because what you can have isn't predicated on what your account is at. Now you can hear this and you could be cynical and you could say, well, they're saying this because, we're going to be starting a fundraising campaign in 2020, and we are, and we're just trying to kind of get you to feel guilty. At the end of the year, we're a little bit below where our budget is, and we are, but we're just trying to guilt you. I think that will be dealt with by some other scripture. I would argue that is not the case. We're not doing this so that the staff get a bonus. We're not doing this so that, I don't know why we would do it. If bass boat, that's right. I've given up hope on the bass boat. For years, when we would submit our budgets, I would put in the budget the money for a bass boat, and it would always get cut really fast. And I don't know why I put it in, because I hate fishing. I really do. I don't know what you do with a bass boat if not fish for bass off of it. But I just wanted to see if it would make it. It never did. Maybe. We'll see. The dream still lives. But what he's doing is he's not just saying, I can't handle this. I'm not giving you this because I don't care about you enough. I'm not aware of you. There's some times where he's walking us through difficulty that he's trying to rid us of a fear. And you can a lot of times only see that as you look back in the past. Now look at something that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. This is the second letter that we have early copies of that he wrote. So it's 2 Corinthians. The first one, we went on a limb and named that 1 Corinthians. Okay, so this is 2 Corinthians. And he's talking about some churches that were in Macedonia. Macedonia is in the upper part of Italy now, and it's really important that you realize that it was up there. And the reason is that put it in pretty close proximity to Rome. In that day, that was pretty close proximity. And that was a problem if you were a follower of Jesus in those churches. And here's why. Periodically, there would be persecutions that Rome would enact on the Jews and the Christians. Sometimes it would just be the Christians. Sometimes it would be both. But there would be things that would be done. And Rome didn't like that Jews were saying that the Caesar wasn't God. Now, they weren't particularly religious, but they were pretty superstitious. And so they would think, if you're saying that this God that we're not even sure is real, but you say he's not, if he is real, he's going to come after us. And so they would try to squash people that would reject that thought. So that put the Christians and the Jews in their crosshairs. And they were that close, that would have happened. That was happening in this area of Macedonia. So they could be arrested. They could have their jobs taken, their homes taken. They could, in some cases, be killed. This was happening. But the Christians had an additional problem. In some areas, they had a problem with the Jews. And here's why. Back in this day, the first century, whatever job you had, okay, the only way you really had it was if you were a part of a guild. So if you were a stonemason, you'd be a part of a stonemasons guild. If you were a blacksmith, you'd be part of a blacksmiths guild. A baker, anything. If you worked at one of the temples, you'd be at a temple worker guild. And a guild was like a professional association, kind of like a union, not quite, kind of like a professional association, not quite. It was a clustering of people that all did the same thing in the same area. And every guild, they would have a temple that they would go to, and they would have a false god that they would worship. And so there would be these ceremonies where they would honor whatever false god it was, offer it as sacrifice, and then they would divvy out the jobs however often that needed to be done. That was kind of the central place that you came to get work in your field. Now, there's a problem for the Jews and the Christians because they weren't allowed to do that. The scriptures said you can't bow down to those things. So they lost access to those jobs just because of their faith, right? So then what the Jews did was a really smart thing. At the temple in Jerusalem and at the synagogues, which were just really local, smaller versions of the temple in these different cities, they would have marketplaces. Remember in the run-up to Easter, during the Passion Week, Jesus kicks over the tables, makes a whip, does that. He's not going after the fact that it's a marketplace. That was intended. It was an unfair one. They were cheating people. That's what he was going after. So they would have these marketplaces, and they would trade, and they would do things like that, and then they would also divvy out jobs. So you really needed to be a part of the synagogue. You really needed to be a part of the temple. But if you're a Christian, you had another problem. Not just the persecution, but some of the synagogues started kicking Christians out because they were saying that Jesus was the Messiah. The religious leaders in the synagogue were saying he wasn't, and that created a bit of a problem. So they would be kicked out of the synagogue. If you're kicked out of the synagogue, you can't use the marketplace, and you don't get the jobs. So these people were being plunged into enormous poverty in Macedonia, the Christians were. Massive poverty. You didn't have unemployment insurance. The unemployment insurance was the synagogue. You get kicked out, you are done there. You don't do anything with them there. This was the plight of the Christians in Macedonia. Paul was going to them to see where their needs were and to give them money. A lot of the wealthier churches would take up offerings and they would give. But something really wild happened. Look at this. This is him just talking about the church in Macedonia to the church in Corinth. Now, friends, I want to report on the surprising and generous ways in which God is working in the churches in Macedonia province. Fierce troubles came down on the people of those churches, pushing them to the very limit. The trial exposed their true colors. They were incredibly happy, though desperately poor. I mean, how many times when people say your trial exposed your true colors, the next phrase isn't usually very pleasant. Our true colors, I guess, suck. I don't know, but this was good. They were incredibly happy, though desperately poor. And listen to Paul as he's writing this, as the Holy Spirit is guiding him in the words. You can hear the surprise as he's talking about it. The pressure triggered something totally unexpected, an outpouring of pure and generous gifts. I was there and saw it for myself. They gave offerings of whatever they could, far more than they could afford, pleading for the privilege of helping out the relief of poor Christians. Paul was likely going there to sense their need, to assess it so that they could have some other churches give, and that he did end up doing that later for them. But they said, we can't give much, but we can give something, and we want to. These people were being squashed by the difficulty of life. And yet they found something that was deeper and firmer under their feet than that difficulty, that God had not abandoned them. And if he had not abandoned them, then they were okay, even if they weren't okay in the moment. This was totally spontaneous, entirely their own idea, and caught us completely off guard. What explains it was that they had first given themselves unreservedly to God and to us. It just basically says they had laid everything at the feet of Jesus. They put it all at the foot of the cross, however we want to talk about it. They just trusted God. And then they trusted Paul and the other people that they weren't going to, take it and steal it, which is good. That makes it hard to give. The other giving simply flowed out of the purposes of God working in their lives. These are people that would have every single legitimate reason not to give and to be looking to receive. Every single one. It would be very hard for us to make an argument that they shouldn't. But they understood something deeper that sometimes we miss, and that God is there. He has not abandoned them. He had not failed them, and so they can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, so I will have no fear. What can mere people do to me? I'm not saying this in verse 8 in order to order you around against your will, but by bringing in the Macedonians' enthusiasm as a stimulus to your love, I'm hoping to bring the best out of you. You are familiar with the generosity of our Master, Jesus Christ. Rich as he was, he gave it all away for us. In one stroke, he became poor, we became rich. Now, when Paul says we became rich, he doesn't mean we became physically rich. Our richness was our proximity to the God that created the universe. God had not abandoned us. He had not left us. And Jesus he stepped away from this perfect connection between the Father and the Spirit to come and be with us. That's what makes us rich. And then lastly, once the commitment is clear, you do what you can and not what you can't. This is the thing that if we genuinely believe this and truly operate under this, this is what keeps us from using this as a lever for manipulation. The thing that we have said for 30 years around here is this: do what you can and don't feel bad for what you can't. The only way this thing has worked for 30 years is by a bunch of people giving what they can, and then we take it before the Lord, and he takes what is not enough, and every single year he makes it enough. But what it requires is that each of us do what we can. That might be a very little bit. It might be more. You do what you can and not what you can't. I love this next line. The heart regulates the hands. This is not about the hands just doing it out of guilt, out of shame, to brag, to show people how impressive you are. The heart regulates the hands. Jesus said the same thing in the Gospels. He said the heart regulates the mouth. The heart regulates the eyes. Heart regulates a lot. What's going on in here is demonstrated here. He's saying, I want you to believe at such a depth that you have not been abandoned, that you are safe, that you're in a position where you can give what you can. Not so that we get more money. The goal of this wasn't to get more money for these early churches, and the goal isn't for us to just get more money. The goal is that we live in a way where we're operating as if this is true, because it is. Once the commitment is clear, you do what you can, not what you can't. The heart regulates the hands. This isn't so others can take it easy while you sweat it out. No, you're shoulder to shoulder with them all the way. Your surplus matching their deficit, and their surplus matching yours. In the end, you come out even. As it is written, nothing left over to the one with the most, nothing lacking to the one with the least. It's interesting that what Paul does here, right at the end, nothing left over to the one with the most, nothing lacking to the one with the least. That's Exodus 16 he's quoting. What he's quoting is the section in Exodus where the Israelites are wandering around the wilderness. They've just been rescued from Egyptian slavery, and the entire nation of Israel is wandering around in this really remote, desolate area. There's not food for them. And being people, as are we do like to eat occasionally. We find it important and helpful. And so what God did is he provided manna. He gave them this miraculous kind of food, and he just provided it every morning. And the deal was pretty simple. You took a certain amount for each member of your household, and you took enough for that day. Here's how much you need for each member of your household for this day, and then that's what you take. Each morning, you would go and you collect it again. The only distinction was on Friday, which was the day before their Sabbath, you could collect 2 days' worth, so you wouldn't have to collect on the Sabbath. Now, on any other day other than Friday, if you tried to stockpile a little bit, kind of have a little secret cache of the manna, in your house, it would go rancid overnight. On Friday, it wouldn't, because God's like, well, I gave it to you. I can make it last as long or as little as I want. That manna, that provision, was intended to take them then, when they're in the wilderness, back to the way it was in the garden, where God provided everything, where our relationship to him was clear and easy and good, and everything around us was provided by him. And we had work that we had to do, but it wasn't bad work. It wasn't the work that a lot of you are facing over this next week as we move into Thanksgiving break. It was good, and we enjoyed it, and it let us create things from the ground and grow things, and all of this stuff was going on. His provision in Exodus was to remind them of the way it was at the start of Genesis. And so then what Paul does is he hearkens back to this to remind them that's the way it's always supposed to have been. In the kingdom, God is the provider. We look to him to see how he's going to provide, and then we honor him with the steps along the way that show our trust. This is what we do. This is how we live. Nothing left over to the one with the most, nothing lacking to the one with the least. There's always supposed to be enough for everyone in the kingdom.